everything that we need, not just to survive, but thrive, are found in animal proteins. Every single vitamin mineral. There is not one thing that we need from plants whatsoever. Now, the counter to this would be, what about our antioxidants, for example? Well, plants don't contain antioxidants. Plants contain pro-oxidants.
Richard, how did you find carnivore?
Dave, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to come to speak. It's an absolute pleasure. Carnivore, for me, has been a series of incremental changes. Believe it or not, once a long time ago, just over a decade ago, in fact, I was clinically obese. I was type 2 diabetic. I suffered with chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, arthritic pains, daily debilitating migraines that would make me blind, which was the worst. For that, I was on 3 different medications. They would make me blind to the stage that I would be bedridden for several days. The anxiety and depression was also debilitating. For this reason, I would struggle to leave my house. And at that time, my life was quite literally spent living in boxes. So I lived in my box, my house. The only time that I would leave my box was to jump into my metal box. I would drive my metal box to another big box, my place of work. And then I would go into a small box, my office, inside this bigger box. And this was my life. My life was quite literally spent living in boxes. At the end of the day, I would perform this in reverse and jump back into my metal box and drive back home to the box that I lived in. The anxiety and depression were so debilitating that I would very rarely, as I say, leave my house. And if there were a neighbor in the street or a neighbor was walking past, I wouldn't be able to leave my house and walk to my car. Not because I was rude, but because I never felt worthy of the company of others. So I had an incredibly low opinion of myself. I was never confident. I could never go anywhere on my own. So yeah, my life at that point was quite literally spent living in boxes. Now, since I've changed my diet and lifestyle, I like to use the analogy that I break boxes for a living. I break boxes for a living, and I teach others how to do the same. And all of this has come through changing my diet first and foremost. Now, in the midst of this, it was so debilitating that I would struggle to walk a flight of stairs. So I could not walk a flight of stairs without having to stop or be severely out of breath. And this was in my mid to late 20s. Now, I was told by my doctor that this was just a fact of life, and here's your medication, go on your merry way. Not knowing anything about nutrition, not knowing anything about medication, it just didn't seem to sit right. So I began experimenting, and what I knew was that bread severely bloated me. Every time I consumed bread, it made me feel incredibly bloated. So from a point of vanity, I guess, I removed bread, hoping that it would reduce the bloat in my stomach and therefore make me look less obese. The idea was that men like to have a big chest and a flatter stomach. So I thought if I could reduce the bloat in my stomach, it would give the impression that I was more manly and my chest was bigger, and therefore I was less obese. And it worked. So within 2 months, I'd dropped 28 pounds without dieting, purely through restricting bread. The effect of this was the bloat had gone away, which was what I wanted. I wasn't expecting any weight loss, which sparked my curiosity as to why this had happened. So then I began restricting other forms of bread, things like chicken nuggets, burgers that were wrapped in breadcrumbs, and so on and so forth. And I began researching. I spoke to a friend of mine, and this was over a decade ago. So, and it was in the UK. So ketosis, or the keto lifestyle, wasn't a thing back in those days. And what was available was online and from America, and much of it was, I believe, to be misinformation, at least, at that time. So I quite literally fell into every pitfall that you can imagine. I made every mistake that you can think of. But I began investigating, this ketogenic lifestyle, which I believed to be a fad at the time. All of these diets are, everything that crops up is this, is a fad. But further research led me down a rabbit hole, and it became apparent that ketosis is a metabolic state. It's our natural metabolic state. It's the metabolic state we're born in, and it's the metabolic state that we've evolved in almost our entire existence. So this is far from a fad. This is how we are meant to be. So I gravitated deeper down that journey from low carb into what I'd class as being dirty keto. So I learned and understood more about macronutrients. And as we do, I began restricting the breads and the grains and more carbohydrates. I was still consuming fruits because I believed that they were healthy for me. As I gravitated deeper into the journey, I was consuming more vegetables because, vegetables are good for you, apparently. And we can get into this. But I continued on this journey for many years, gravitating into what I'd call being strict keto. And then, and I quite often say that this was through laziness, but it was more to do with convenience. When I was at work, so at this point, I'm working for myself. So let's take a step back. At that time, when I found this way of living, I was a purchasing manager for an electrical engineering company. Now, within 12 months of removing bread and removing seed oils and watching my carbohydrates and predominating animal proteins and natural fats, I'd lost 107 pounds. So I'd reversed my diabetes. All of these other things went away. So I no longer suffered as severely as I used to with migraines. Now, I still suffer with migraines, but instead of suffering every single day, I may get 2 or 3 migraines each year. And these are stimulated by several factors, one of which is stress, another is lack of sleep. And now I work for myself. So I'm self-employed, and we can get into what I do later on if you like. But basically, I completely changed my life, and I felt like I'd found a secret, and I wanted to tell the world about my secret. Nobody was talking about this stuff. I went back to my doctor after losing all of this weight, reversing my diabetes, becoming incredibly fit and healthy. And my doctor told me that the lifestyle I was living was bad for me. The fat that I was consuming was going to increase my cholesterol and lead to cardiovascular disease. The protein I was consuming was going to lead to cancer. And at this point, I was completely uneducated. But I had common sense. My doctor at this point was 3 times my physical size. And I had just come away from being clinically obese. And I'm scratching my head thinking, it just doesn't make sense. This person who was meant to be a professional is telling me what I should and should not be eating, yet is not fit and healthy themselves, clearly has medical problems. And it's telling me that I should be on medication opposed to consuming natural foods. And I didn't have a clue about nutrition at the time, but it just didn't make sense. Why would consuming something that nature intended be bad for me after millions and millions of years of evolution? So I left the doctor's surgery, and I was I felt isolated. I felt alone, and I felt ostracized because this happened across the board. Like, I went back to my friends and family, and they had the same reasoning. All of this fat cannot be good for you. It's going to clog your arteries. This protein is going to lead to cancer. And at this point now, I'm eating lots of salt. Salt is bad for your blood pressure, allegedly. And we can get right into this. But I felt the healthiest that I'd ever felt. I felt the fittest that I'd ever felt. From a simple perspective, something that made me feel this way couldn't be wrong. So I persevered. I decided to begin learning and understanding more about nutrition. So I retrained as a nutritionist. And much of what I was taught, I knew to be incorrect, because now at this point, I knew the power of ketones and what they did in the body. I knew how important natural fats were. I understood the proteins and fats build every cell in the body. And it just doesn't make sense. Why would consuming an egg be bad for me if this builds quite literally every tissue in the body? And again, we can get into the weeds with this as we go along. So I qualified as a nutritionist, and I felt that I now had the basis in order to spread the word, teach my secret. And I began training again. I began working out. At this point, because I'd lost 7.5 stone, I was incredibly lean. I was small. People weren't listening because I just looked like a little boy. I'd lost all of this weight, and I was just a small human being. People are very visual. So I began working out, and I've always lifted weights. I've always trained. I've always tried to be fit and healthy. But despite this, despite living from the food pyramid or the eat well plate in the UK, I was your prototypical healthy living person. I consumed my grains. I avoided my saturated fats. I predominated my vegetable oils. I consumed my vegetables and fruits. And this is what led me to becoming clinically. And yes, I did consume other compounds. I'm not saying that I didn't indulge, but I consumed what I would deem to be a healthy lifestyle generally. And it led me to being unwell. So everybody to say that this lifestyle was detrimental, it just didn't make sense. But I began training again after losing all this weight, and I realized that I was now building muscle at a rate of knots that I'd never been able to build before. Yes, I became big previously, but it was quite often fat. I'd gain muscle, but I was also gaining lots of fat. I always had this problem with trying to keep my stomach flat. I always had a barrel, and I was always obsessed with trying to keep my chest bigger than my stomach. And this came easily with this new diet that I was, this new lifestyle. I was building muscle hand over fist, and it led me down a journey that I never expected. Now, before I tell you the next part, remember what I said earlier about suffering severely with anxiety and depression and not being able to leave my house. I decided to enter a men's physique bodybuilding competition. After a year of lifting weights, I thought that I was in fairly tidy nick. And I thought, let's enter a competition and let's prove to the world that this new lifestyle that I just discovered is absolutely life-changing. So I began training for this competition, and everybody begged me not to do this competition, my friends and family, because they knew that I suffered so severely with anxiety and depression. I couldn't leave my house. Now, the thought of walking onto a stage filled with hundreds of people who were there to critique you. They're not there to look at you and tell you how amazing you look. They're there to look for your faults because they are quite literally comparing you to a stage full of other men. And you're on stage in essentially your pants. So you're never going to be more exposed to the world. And I didn't like my body. Even at this point, I just felt that I wanted to show where I came from to where I am now. So where I came from to where I am now, and how quickly I achieved this, and in an attempt to show people what could be done. So I did this. A super long story short, I competed. I came second in my first amateur competition. I went back a year later. I entered 2 competitions. I came second and third. Every time I was improving. I had no intention of competing twice. This was going to be a one-time thing just to get some images. Year 3, I went back and I was awarded pro status. So I became a professional bodybuilder within 3 years of living this lifestyle. Essentially, I continued to compete. I went back. I competed many times. I didn't win for a very long time. At this point, I'd never won a competition, but I'd also never been unplaced. 5 years in, I went on to win the Middlesbrough Championship. A week later, the British Championship. And 2 years after that, I went on to become European champion. So I was number 1 in Europe in my category within 5 to 6 years of living this lifestyle. In fact, it was 5 to 6 years of training. So I was living the lifestyle a little bit longer. But how quickly that occurred compared to other athletes who had been training for 10, 15, 20 years. So this achievement was incredible. Number one in Europe as a professional, from being unable to walk up the stairs without stopping or being severely out of breath. And this is how powerful this lifestyle is. So this is how life-changing this lifestyle is.
Can I just jump in with a question? How was your anxiety that first time when you placed second, when you first went out on stage?
So look, it was sky high. Now that said, and we can get into the science into why this works, but living a ketogenic lifestyle or being carnivore helps regulate these pathways through a number of mechanisms, and it does help calm things like anxiety and depression through a number of mechanisms, through cortisol, through the production of ketones, through the adenosine receptor, and so on and so forth, altering the glutamate to GABA ratio. Ketones are an incredible compound. They're a compound that we can produce naturally, and they do some amazing things in the body. So even though I was still suffering with anxiety, now I was able to almost compartmentalize or crush this anxiety. So I felt as if I could grab, if it were possible to physically grab something and crush it right down into a ball and almost put it over my shoulder. It's still there. I'm aware it's there, but I can't really see it. Does that make sense? So I was now in control of my anxiety. Rather than it controlling me, I controlled it. I was now able to recognize when I was feeling anxious, but my body was now able to deal with this a lot more effectively and efficiently than ever before. Now, prior to this, I used to take medications for anxiety and depression. So I was on a myriad of medication. I'm now medication free. So I do not take any medication for anything at all. I'm not against medication. And again, look, we can go into this as deep as you like, but I believe that there's a place for medication. But medication is there to address a symptom for a short term. But we need to look at the root cause. What's causing the problem? Let's look at the problem. Let's fix the problem, and then we can stop the medication. I don't believe that we should be consuming medication long term. Now, if it wasn't for medication, at some points in my life, I would be dead without question. But now, my requirement for said medication is very, very few and far between. In fact, I can't remember the last time I've taken medication. I can't remember the last time I was actually properly unwell. Yes, we feel under the weather. Yes, we know we become susceptible to colds and viruses, and our bodies are fighting these off. But our body's ability to do this is massively increased when we are no longer insulin resistant. And the reason for this is that when we're insulin resistant, we increase the amount of receptors within the body. The angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor, or the ACE2 receptors. We all have them, but when we are insulin resistant, the body makes more, therefore increasing the availability of the docking of these receptors, if you like. So we increase our ability to become or contract a virus or infection. Also, with insulin resistance blocks and damages our natural killer cells. So now, not only are we more susceptible to contracting viruses and infections, but now our body's ability to fight them is heavily diminished. And all of this comes back to insulin resistance. And again, we can go as deep into this as you like. But yes, in answer to your question, my anxiety was incredibly high. I almost didn't go onto stage. I was right at the back of the pack. And as you walk to the stage line, the curtains are there, and I stopped and I didn't walk out. The anxiety had me with both hands. And a friend of mine who was there to support me called me from the audience. He knew how severely this anxiety was. He cheered me along, gave me some words of wisdom from the audience, and I walked out. And at that point, I forgot how to walk. And this is how debilitating anxiety is. So I was trying to put one leg in front of the other, one foot in front of the other, and I really had to think about it. My legs felt like jelly. It felt like I was going to fall over. So this is how scared I was to be out on stage. This is well out of my box. So, we're coming from living in boxes to being well outside of this box that I felt comfortable in, well out of my comfort zone. But, it's one of the best things that I've ever done. And if there's any advice that I can give people is that start breaking boxes. Start breaking boxes and start living outside of these boxes, because incredible things can happen. And as I said, what this allowed me to do is become number one in Europe. I'm retired. So I'm only 41, but I've come away from bodybuilding because now part of what I do is I work with athletes. I work with endurance athletes, Ironman athletes, runners, and athletes from across the board. And to better understand how I can further help these athletes, I decided to get involved with running and cycling, duathlons and triathlons. So I've gravitated on that over the last 2 years. So I'm considerably smaller now, but now my body is fit for purpose for doing this. So I've gone from being a bodybuilder. I'm still too big for a runner. So I competed this weekend in a half marathon, and compared to the runners, I'm still too big. I've still got chest and a little bit of delts. You see them and they're like 50K, and I'm considerably heavier than that. And I may not be as quick as the quicker guys, but my times are not too shabby for the time that I've been running. And to put this into perspective, my 5K time is 17 minutes, my 10K time is 37 minutes, and my half marathon is around 1 hour 25, 26. And I'm probably capable of something close to 1 hour 20 for a half marathon. So for anyone who does running and things, for someone who is new to running, so the beginning of 23 is when I decided to start running and cycling. I work with people who have never ran a sub 20-minute 5K. And it's the lifestyle that has allowed me to do this. And I do very little training. I run on average, if you look at my Strava, maybe once every 1.5 weeks. And I may cover, somewhere between 6 to 10 miles. A runner will run 80 to 100 miles, and I'm holding my own against them. Yes, I'm not right up there with these elite runners, but when you take all of these factors into consideration, what I've achieved there, I think, is pretty incredible, considering I don't consume carb and considering that I'm carnivore. So I don't eat any carbohydrate. I compete fasted. My body's fueled by fats and ketones, and again, we can get into this, but and that's what I do. So from this, trying to tell the world about my secret, I retrained as a nutritionist. So that's what I practice in now. I've also qualified in many other things. So I love to learn. I understand the A gets me to C, but I want to understand the B. So this year alone, I've accrued over 600 hours of CPD points, which is 600 hours basically of study towards things like molecular biochemistry, epigenetics, cortisol, hormones, and blood analysis, clinical blood analysis, and so on and so forth. I quite literally live this. This is my life. I get to the office for 8:30. I work until 8:30, 9:30. I go home. I cook some steak, and then I study for 3 to 4 hours. I work and teach people, from the medical community. I offer consultations, and I run my business, which is called the Keto Pro. All of this is to try to pass on my words of wisdom to help people, regardless of where they are on their journey. I want to help people gravitate into being fitter and healthier through these secrets that I've accrued over the years. Now I'm carnivore. So right. Coming back to your original question, sorry, Dave. It's in work, and I quite often say through laziness, but it's through convenience. It's far easier to fry a steak than it is to cook vegetables. Now, when I gravitated down to this journey, I was this person who was consuming lots of spinach and kale and making spinach and kale smoothies with turmeric and black pepper, which is not good for you, by the way. And we can get into this. But I was doing this. I was eating my meats. I was ketogenic, and I was thriving, and I was fitter and healthier than I'd ever been prior to this. But I was fitter and healthier in spite of and not because of. And by that, what I mean is my body's producing ketones in the form of beta-hydroxybutyrate. Ketones do incredible things within the body. This allowed me to achieve incredible things. But I was still consuming certain vegetables, and I believed that vegetables were full of antioxidants, which they're not, by the way, vitamins and minerals. And again, we can get into this. But I began removing the vegetables because it was just easier to fry a steak in work. Beef or steak is the original fast food. You chuck that into a pan, and depending on how you like it cooked, it's done in minutes. And, people say that I eat rubbish because of convenience. It takes a lot longer to drive to your local takeaway, or your fish and chip shop, or whatever it may be, to pick up, your local fast food restaurant. You can fry a steak in minutes. You can boil an egg in a couple of minutes, So these are the original fast food. So I started just consuming animal proteins, particularly beef, for the better part of 6 months. And I realized that I had not consumed any vegetable matter for this period of time. And I felt the best I'd ever felt. I felt even better than I did prior to this. And I didn't think that this was even possible. Aches and pains that I still had went away. Mental clarity was crystal clear. My energy was in abundance. My recovery was a lot better. My work output was massively increased. So this didn't compute because vegetables and fruits contain vitamins and minerals and all of these antioxidants. So then this led me down this journey, this rabbit hole, if you like. Now, I'm so deep down the rabbit hole that I've come out the other end. And I've looked extensively into vitamin and mineral profile in vegetables, and they don't exist in the quantities that we believe that they do. And I'll give you some examples. Vitamin A. Vitamin A does not exist in plants. So we're told to consume plants for vitamin A, but plants contain beta-carotene. Now, beta-carotene is not vitamin A. True vitamin A is retinol. So the beta-carotene is the plant version of vitamin A. Now, to convert that into retinol, it involves another enzyme called BCMO, which we need that to act upon beta-carotene in order to convert it into retinol. But it's so inefficient that it's depleted by over 20 times, making the amount converted close to zero. B vitamins is pretty similar. All of the B vitamins that you can think of are incredibly low, trace amounts in vegetables, with niacin being low, pyridoxine B6 being incredibly low, cobalamin B12 non-existent in plants. Yes, folate or B9 does exist in plants, but we can get this from animal proteins. There's more folate in an egg than there is in plants, for example. Vitamin C, yes, we get vitamin C from plants and fruits, but they're not highly bioavailable. For a start, and second to that, vitamin C is also found in animal proteins, contrary to popular belief. Now, the interesting thing with this is the vitamin C and glucose compete for absorption through the GLUT4 transporter. So when we consume less carbohydrate, our requirement for dietary vitamin C is reduced. So we don't need as much vitamin C. Now, a 12-ounce beefsteak, for example, contains around 12 milligrams of vitamin C, which is plenty. We don't need an awful lot more than that. And when we look at plant compounds for vitamin C, things like kale contains more vitamin C per 100 grams than citrus fruits. It's around 93 milligrams. But kale also contains a compound called flavonoids. Now, flavonoids block the body's ability to absorb that vitamin C, reducing it greatly. Plus, the cooking process will reduce that 93 down to 20. And then we've got the flavonoids, which hinder the absorption of the rest of these nutrients. So it's not to say that we don't absorb any, but there's a lot less within these plant compounds than we're led to believe. Then we've got vitamin D. Vitamin D does not exist in plants. Vitamin E does, but then we can find vitamin E in abundance also in animal proteins. Vitamin K, we're told that kale is a good source of vitamin K. And in fact, if you go to the supermarket and pick up a pack of kale, it will say high in vitamin K or good source in vitamin K. There is no vitamin K in kale. The vitamin K in kale is vitamin K1. The human body needs vitamin K2. So again, we need to convert this K1 into K2. And this process is so laborious that close to zero is actually converted. And then we go on to things like creatine, choline, carnitine, and carnosine. All of these compounds are found in abundance in animal proteins. Quite literally, everything that we need, not just to survive, but thrive, are found in animal proteins. Every single vitamin mineral. There is not one thing that we need from plants whatsoever. Now, the counter to this would be, what about our antioxidants, for example? Well, plants don't contain antioxidants. Plants contain pro-oxidants. And a simple search on any search engine will show this. Now, what they say is that the pro-oxidant response to these compounds in plants will elicit an increase in glutathione, which is the body's master antioxidant, and therefore confer a benefit through something called hormesis. It's called a hormetic response. In other words, we put something that's bad into the body, but it leads to a positive outcome because of the body's response. But there's different types of hormesis. So we get molecular hormesis and we can get environmental hormesis. Now, environmental hormesis will be training in the gym, a stress that we lift some weights and we build muscle, or cold water dipping, red light therapy, and so on and so forth. Now, that is true hormesis because this will elicit an increase in glutathione. Glutathione will stay elevated for a prolonged period of time. And when it drops back down, it usually remains elevated above baseline. So that is a true hormetic response. But the hormetic response that we see from vegetables come from a pro-oxidant response. So they activate a pathway called the NRF2 pathway, nuclear factor erythroid 2 related factor 2, NRF2. Now, we're told that this is an oxidative stress pathway, but it isn't. It's a pro-oxidant pathway. So basically, we've put something in like sulforaphane, which is found in broccoli, which we're told is very good for us. Now, this gives us a pro-oxidant response. In response to that, the body puts glutathione into action in order to conjugate to this toxin and remove it because it is a toxin. And we see this elevation in glutathione. But compared to environmental hormesis, the glutathione quite often drops back down very quickly and more often than not ends up lower than where it started. This is not a true hormetic response. Now, the NRF2 pathway, and any search engine can show you this, it's said to be a oxidative, an anti-oxidant pathway. But it isn't. It's a pro-oxidant pathway. And there's a test that you can do to prove that I'm correct with this. So plants will elicit this response via NRF2. And to put it into practice, let's look at broccoli. We just mentioned sulforaphane. Now, we're told that sulforaphane is good for us because it helps fight cancer. Now, sulforaphane is used in chemotherapy treatment. Now, chemotherapy kills every cell in the body, or it does kill healthy cells at least. So why would we take a chemotherapy pill if we didn't have cancer? And this is what we do when we consume broccoli every day. Now, sulforaphane is so toxic that it doesn't exist in a healthy plant. It's only created when the plant becomes under attack because sulforaphane is a phytoalexin. It's a plant toxin that's used as a defense chemical. So what happens is when we consume broccoli, when we chew on that broccoli plant, myrosinase binds to glucoraphanin and it increases or releases an isothiocyanate called sulforaphane. And sulforaphane is this toxin that we are told confers a benefit. But sulforaphane causes clastogenesis, which is damage to our DNA. So sulforaphane quite literally damages our DNA. Now, DNA is incredibly important because via epigenetics, we take photocopies every day of our DNA via mRNA to go through a process in the ribosome basically to create human proteins. So in simple terms, we consume animal proteins. These animal proteins are broken down into amino acids, and then the body reconstitutes these amino acids into human proteins to allow to heal and repair and build every single cell in your body. Anything that damages the DNA is detrimental to our health, and sulforaphane damages DNA. it hinders the effect of epigenetics, and it downregulates the body's ability to create these processes through a number of mechanisms. Sulforaphane also competes for iodine. So it competes for iodine at the absorption of the thyroid. So if you have thyroid problems, these plants, these cruciferous vegetables, are anti-nutrients for you, because the sulforaphane and the other isothiocyanates will block the absorption of iodine, which we need for the conversion of T4 into T3. So therefore, we hinder our body's ability to create thyroid hormone. And lots of these cruciferous vegetables do this. So not only does it damage DNA, but it also blocks the body's ability to create thyroid hormone. And we can go right into the weeds if you want, because every plant does all of these things.
So this, plants are good for you kind of thing that we're told from when we're like a year old is something, it just feels like marketing to me. But what's the benefit for people? I mean, vegetables, you can't patent vegetables, right? Like, why is the message so strong that we should be doing this?
Fantastic question. And this is just my personal opinion. But we know, and this part is fact, and this part we know. The sugar industry and the pharmaceutical companies are owned by the same companies, and we can prove this. We know that they are connected. We see, the CEOs of PepsiCo basically on the board of directors for sugar companies. I can't remember the one in particular, but they all work together. Now, this is the perfect business model, because the sugar industry. And by the sugar industry, man, I mean things like not just Coca-Cola, but things like Nestle and Kellogg's and so on and so forth, because all carbs break down into sugar. So these are sugar companies. So the sugar companies, we consume these products that makes us unwell. Then we go to our doctor, and then the doctor gives us medication to make us well again. Now, this is the perfect business model. Imagine a business that you had that would make someone sick, and then you offer them the pill that's going to make them better. It's a perfect business model. And in fairness to them, it's ingenious. Now, coming back to your original question, well, what if we're not eating these compounds? Well, imagine if I wanted to hit two different groups of people. Now, it's easy for me to hit the people who are addicted to sugar, the people who are consuming processed foods and so on and so forth. But how can I make the people who are trying to be fit and healthy unwell? Well, I'll tell them the plants and fruits are incredibly nutritious, and we should be consuming 5 fruit and veg a day. In fact, we should be consuming, the more vegetables that we consume, the better. The more we need fiber. That's the other thing I'm going to tell people. We need lots of fiber, because fiber is really good for us. So I'm going to tell people to consume these compounds because it comes from nature, and something that nature creates can't be bad for us. But there is a caveat to this. The plant compounds that we see today are not the plant compounds they used to be. Grains have been heavily hybridized. They've been crossbred and manufactured to produce higher yields for profit purposes. The proteins within them are no longer the same as they used to be. Modern grains do not resemble ancient grains. Fruits and vegetables that you see today don't resemble the fruits and veg that used to exist. And even if they did, I live in South Wales for all of my sins. I live in a valley which is always raining and cloudy. So the opposite to you, I should imagine, Dave. But it's, I would never have consumed apples. Bananas. I would have consumed apples. Bananas, oranges would never have grown in South Wales or the UK for that matter. The only apples that did grow would be small, tiny little crab apples, which are incredibly sour, and you're not going to eat more than 1 or 2 of them at best. Berries were found in abundance, but again, they're not the berries that we see today. They're going to be a lot smaller than they once were. And again, these would have been seasonal. These would have come into season at the end of the summer in order to fatten us up for a cold winter. Now, that should tell you everything that you need to know about sugar from nature. It comes to fruition at the right time in order to fatten us up, which was important for survival, by the way, because we didn't have central heating. We were open to the elements, so we needed to gain fat. So this is an important mechanism that the body used to initiate in order to save our life. So it does have its place. The issue with modern diets now is that we're constantly in fat storage mode. We're constantly trying to build our fat up for the winter that never really comes because we've got central heating and nice warm clothes all year round. And the other thing we do, we carb load. We carb load for the marathon that we never run. You know, not that you need carbs to run a marathon, but that's probably a talk for another day. But that's how I would tell people who wanted to be fit and healthy, but I actually wanted them to be unwell. I would tell them to consume these compounds that contain plant toxins, phytoalexins, compounds which not only make you unwell, but can kill you. And we can get into this again if you like. Spinach, for example. Spinach, we're told, is super nutritious. Popeye used to eat lots of spinach for his iron. Now, iron is found in spinach without question, but it's tightly bound to oxalate and we cannot access that iron. The human body needs heme iron and spinach contains non-heme iron. Now, spinach also contains another compound called oxalate. Now, oxalates can kill you. Oxalates can kill you. Now, if you look at the volume of oxalates that are found in spinach, depending on which part of the world that it's grown and which time of year, this can range between 600 to 1,000 milligrams of oxalate per 100 grams. Now, the human body doesn't use oxalate. Oxalate is it's a waste product through the glyoxylate pathway, through the consumption of hydroxyproline and glycine, and we excrete or waste maybe as much as 40 milligrams of oxalate each day. We can comfortably work up to 100 milligrams, but I just said that a pack or 100 grams of spinach can contain as much as 1,000 milligrams of oxalate. Now, in the UK, spinach is sold in 200-gram packs, which means there's as much as 2,000 milligrams found in one pack of spinach. Now, as little as 3,000 milligrams of oxalates has been shown to cause death. Now, does that mean if you eat a pack of spinach, you're going to die? Very unlikely, but it is possible is my point. And in regards to these people who have died with that lower ingestion of spinach, they do have other underlying conditions, but it just shows that it is possible. But 15,000 milligrams of oxalate will kill you dead. 15,000 milligrams. Now, if we think that there's as much as 2,000 milligrams per pack, then this is 8 packs of spinach. Now, I used to eat 2 packs of spinach a day when I was making my spinach and turmeric, smoothies. So I used to add spinach and kale. I used to put turmeric in, which is also very high in oxalate, by the way, and is not your friend. I hate to break it to the listeners, but turmeric is not your friend. It's not an antioxidant, and it is incredibly bad for you. And I used to add black pepper. Now, we're told to add black pepper to these compounds because we're told that it increases the bioavailability. It increases absorption. Now, that's not strictly true. What it does do is it blocks an enzyme called UDP glucuronosyl transferase, which is part of phase 2 detoxification in the liver. So these phases of detoxification in the liver, there's 3 phases to this. Phase 1 is the use of an enzyme called cytochrome P450. And that basically breaks down fat-soluble molecules into water-soluble. So we can go on to phase 2, which is conjugation, where it will bind to glucuronic acid, amongst other things, to be excreted, which is phase 3. Now, UDP glucuronosyl transferase is part of phase 2. Now, this detoxification system is in place to remove toxic compounds. So if you consume toxic compounds, this is the process it goes through. Now, these compounds that we consume from spinach and turmeric, just to name a few, go through this detoxification process in the liver. And things like curcumin, for example, will block phase 1 because they directly inhibit cytochrome P450. And then things like piperine, which we add, as I say, to this smoothie, blocks that enzyme UDP glucuronosyl transferase, which is part of phase 2. So we hinder the body's ability to remove a toxin, and this is why the body absorbs more. but your body is trying to remove it. Your body is telling you that this is a toxin. It's not for us. Let's get rid of it. And then we are directly inhibiting the body's ability to remove it. And this is what black pepper does. Black pepper is also not good for. I'm not telling people not to use black pepper. It is far lower on the toxicity scale, but I can't use black pepper. It brings me out in cold sores and boils. And if you are prone to cold sores, piperine, which is a compound found in pepper, will cause this in abundance. So pepper for many people is a no-go. But turmeric and spinach are not your friend. They consume these toxic compounds. So if I want to make people sick, then I will tell them to eat all of these things. I'll tell them to go away and eat nuts and seeds. Seeds are incredibly high in cyanogenic glycosides, which break down into hydrocyanic acid, which breaks down into cyanide. So seeds that we consume every day contain toxic amounts of cyanide. Apple seeds, for example, contain another compound, another hydrocyanic acid called amygdalin. Now, as little as 80 apple seeds, if you were to put them into a blender, could be enough to kill you. Yes, it's on the lower end, and it's unlikely, but we have seen people die from as little as 80 apple seeds. Now, the question there is, people are going to say, well, I'm not going to eat the apple seeds. But I used to. I used to chop apples up into quarters. I used to put them into my blender to make a fruit smoothie. I used to put 4 apples in there, along with other compounds. There's like 6 to 10 seeds found in an apple, which means that 2 of those shakes throughout the day, when I was adding other compounds like almonds, which contain cyanogenic glycosides, and other flax seeds, which are very high in linamarin, another form of cyanogenic glycoside, I'm basically concocting this perfect storm to cause severe issues within my body, to damage my DNA, and potentially at the higher end cause death. Now, we see adults who do this every day, who are super fit and healthy, but they're healthy in spite of and not because of. They're consuming less of the vegetable oils, less processed foods, and they're doing these things. And this is why, and they tend to work out and train, so they can offset this for so long. But I ran the Cardiff half marathon this weekend, and one person died from a heart attack. Someone who's incredibly fit died because, and I believe, diet related. And I'm just guessing there. So I mean, don't hold me to that. I don't want any backlash from anybody. But my point to this is, super fit and healthy people who live so-called healthy lifestyles, carbs and overconsumption of carbs is not good for us. It leads to glycation. It leads to glycated end products, oxidation, and it leads to cardiovascular disease. It causes cells to become sticky, in simple terms, and it leads to a whole host of problems. Carbs are highly inflammatory when we overconsume them. Yes, we need glucose, but we make glucose naturally through a process called gluconeogenesis. And again, we can get into this. But in answer to your question, Dave, sorry, apologies. I told you you wouldn't have trouble getting me to talk. Look, but this is what I would do to make people become unwell if I wanted them to do so while they thought they were being healthy. Because some people will consume the processed and toxic foods and not care. There are people out there who are trying to do this, but with their best will in the world, grains and seed oils, which take pride of place in a healthy diet, allegedly, are detrimental to your health. And again, we can get into why, but that's what I would do there. So I'm covering both bases. And this is why I believe that the powers that be allow us to become unfit, unhealthy, and then profit from the medication that they sell, essentially. And look, I'm quite conscious that I'm throwing out things which are highly controversial. And should you wish to bleep out or remove any of this, I will not be offended. But yeah, you asked me the question, so
no worries. Just on this point, you're working with athletes, and obviously conversations around diet would probably come into this as well. When you're talking about this kind of stuff with them and trying to get them to understand that, carbohydrate is not necessarily the best thing you could be eating if you want to have a successful athletic career, what kind of response do you get? Do you get pushback?
100%. The athletic community are the hardest community to break, believe it or not. Now, you'd think that they would be more open to things, but they are the hardest community to break down. And to put it into perspective, part of what I do, so I offer consultations. I have a private school group that people can join for live consultations and live Q&As and things. And even within there, people, when they come to me, they're already half educated. They're already curious. So it's easier to break down those barriers. When I go and speak in a public speaking event, there are hundreds of people there, hundreds and hundreds of people, and they are all ears listening to all of the information. Fantastic. But they've already made that first step. Then I get invited to join and speak at clubs, athletic clubs, rugby clubs, football clubs. And I'll go to these clubs, even gyms. Very, very few of the athletes attend. I've been to some of these where none of the athletes have attended. They've asked me to come to speak to the athletes because there's one person there that has seen the light and wants me to come and is telling all of their friends about, look, you need to live this lifestyle. We can make the team a lot better. I go along, sometimes in the early days, I used to do this for free. And I turned up at one club and not one person turned up for my presentation. And this comes away from hundreds when it comes to health, because everybody in the gym, everybody in the club is a nutritionist. Everyone is a professional sports person. They all think they know better. And it's consuming the high amount of carbohydrate that has gotten them to the point that they are today, which is an elite athlete or a high performing athlete. So to tell them that the whole foundation that they have built their career on or their hobby, is flawed and is incorrect, they don't want to hear it for a number of reasons. One, it's a big risk to take to remove something that has worked so well. And secondly, carbs is sugar. Sugar's a drug, and it's more addictive than cocaine. It's sugar blocks the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that stops us from making dumb decisions. So when we consume it, we make dumb decisions. When we consume it, it also blocks and hinders our ability to produce neurotransmitters through a number of mechanisms. We need our neurotransmitters to be fit and healthy. We need our neurotransmitters not to suffer with things like depression, anxiety, for example. But when we consume these compounds, they can elicit these responses. We're hardwired to chase dopamine. We're hardwired to chase serotonin. Now, in a healthy state of consuming animal proteins, the aromatic amino acids, phenylalanine, tryptophan, and tyrosine will go on to produce our neurotransmitters. But in order to do that, we need cofactors, things like zinc, iron, magnesium, vitamin B3, vitamin B6, vitamin B12, so on and so forth. These compounds, these cofactors, can be blocked by as much as 100% if we co-consume them with things that contain lectins and phytic acids. And by that, what I mean is, if we consume our steak with some potatoes or some grains, then the phytic acid and the lectins and the fiber within there are enough to prevent the body's ability to utilize those cofactors to make our neurotransmitters. So this is why I was depressed. This is why I suffered with anxiety, because my neurotransmitters were not being made efficiently. When you're not making them efficiently, you start to make them artificially, if you like. And we do this by consuming sugar. And the way that it works in regards to tryptophan is that when we consume sugar, the body releases insulin. Now, insulin is there to drive amino acids into cells. Now, we're told that it's to drive glucose, which it does do, but it does that to save your life, because excessive amounts of glucose in the blood is poisonous, is toxic. So it removes it from the blood in order to save your life. But the true mechanism of insulin is to drive amino acids into cells. So it drives the amino acids, drives the glucose, it drives all of these things except for tryptophan, leaving tryptophan in circulation available into synthesis, into serotonin. So this is why when we consume, glucose or sugar, for example, we will have a serotonin fix and we'll have a dopamine fix. But each time we do this via this mechanism, it down-regulates the receptor site, which means next time we need more sugar. And this is why when we consume sugar, we get a high and we feel good. And then 10 minutes later, we feel pretty poor. And then we eat more to give this fix again. Whereas if we weren't consuming the sugar, if we weren't consuming the anti-nutrients and we were consuming the animal proteins with the natural fats, we can make these neurotransmitters without hindering these cofactors. And it all comes back down to basics. It comes back down to animal proteins and natural fats. And this is why when we consume these things, these glucose compounds, carbohydrates, and so on and so forth, it's detrimental to our health. It inhibits the body's natural processes. Quite literally everything that we need is found in animal proteins. Every cell in your body is made of protein. Now, if we look at this in regards to the weight of the average cell in the body, and this accounts for 99% of the cells in your body, 70% is water. So let's remove the water because we know that we're made of water. So what's left is 30%. Out of that 30%, 18%. So over half of that 30%, so 18% of the full weight of the cell is protein, which means the second to water, protein predominates. Then it drops down to lipid, which is around 5%, or fat. And then it drops right down to 2% for polysaccharide, which is sugar. So if we look at the macronutrient split, it's protein. Where are we? Protein, fat, and then sugar. So that should tell us everything we need to know. Every cell in the body is made of protein and fat. And then it drops right down to things like our other electrolytes and DNA and RNA and so on and so forth. But out of the macronutrients, proteins and fats predominate. So why are we predominating sugar in our diet if it makes up a fraction of our cell? We need proteins, we need fats.
So I've got a very cynical view on this, like the why question. My view is like no other animal has this issue. No other animal worries about, oh, well, what should I be eating? Should I be eating this or this or this? They just eat their normal food, It's only us that has this problem. And I was like, why is it that we are the only species that is somehow deficient just by eating a natural diet? We need to eat processed foods, or we need to eat all this other stuff, this potential poisons and stuff like that. And then I was like, oh yeah, we're also the only species that have wallets.
Yeah.
And it feels like it just comes down to that. It's all about, I don't know, you could kind of imagine that this is a big conspiracy, right? With the pharmaceutical companies and the food companies and all this kind of thing, right? I kind of, for me, it feels like actually it was just dumb luck because everyone's just out to make money in their own little niche. And then out of dumb luck, they've gone, hang on, these are complementary industries. Let's just keep this on the down low.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, if we look at the production of insulin for diabetes, for example, insulin worked too well. So they made it work less efficiently when we discovered how we could produce insulin. Because basically insulin worked so well that it drove the glucose into the cell, and it led us to being hypoglycemic. So instead of telling patients just to consume less sugar, then they told them to consume more sugar, basically. So, the requirement, basically, if they consumed less sugar, the requirement for insulin would be lower, which means less sales. So if we tell them to consume more sugar to combat the effect of the insulin, then we can tell them to produce or to take more sugar, more insulin. And it is exactly this. It's a business model, I believe, that is there, whether by design or by stupidity. It's a business model that I believe is the strongest business model on the planet. And credit to these industries, they've designed the perfect business model. And I think this is why you and I, who are trying to spread the word of consuming a healthy animal-based lifestyle, get shot down quite often because there's very little profit to be made in beef and lamb. so on and so forth. These industries are never going to make trillions of farm animals. So yeah, I believe you're right. It comes back to profit, which is sad, and I don't think it's going to go away. So unfortunately, this fight continues. We're not gonna change anything from the top down. This needs to be from the grassroots, and that's what I try to do. I teach my clients. I teach my the people that I work with, and I'm hoping that it's the ripple effect. I'm hoping that they become the next pebble in the pond. They change their life, and then their friends and family start asking questions. Well, what have you done to do this? Well, I've done this. And then that ripple effect, that pebble in the pond, and it creates a ripple effect. And I think it is working. It's so tough to get that message out there,
Right. So you've got a crystal ball. Where do you see this going in the next 10, 20 years?
In regards to the sugar industry or the carnivore industry?
I would say, like, regards to, well, maybe two things. Like, because right now there seems to be a big, in most countries, especially Western countries, there seems to be this big plant-based push.
Yeah.
So in terms of kind of what the government's pushing, but also in terms of maybe the uptake of carnivore.
Yeah, it's scary. The plant movement is building momentum. It seems to be at a rate of knots. It seems to be everywhere. And I'm concerned. Look, plants are not good for us. They contain lots of these anti-nutrients, these plant toxins, these phytoalexins, as I say. Plants make medicines, and that is fantastic. And again, just to reiterate a point I made earlier, I'm not against medication. I think there's a point for medication. I think we need medication, but we shouldn't be consuming medication for prolonged periods of time. And the issue with consuming lots of this is it's going to lead to ill health. Now, if I look at, I don't want to get too much in the weeds of this, but if we look at the three reasons people would become plant-based, one is because of health and nutrition. They want to be healthier, but that's not the case. And I think we've covered that with the vitamins and minerals type thing. The other reason would be for the planet, and that's not true either. And I won't bore you with the details, but we can go into, probably on another podcast in regards to why an animal-based lifestyle is far more beneficial for the environment. And the other one is animal cruelty. And I did a podcast not so long ago, basically comparing a plant-based or vegan-based lifestyle and the amount of deaths caused compared to someone who lives a strict carnivore lifestyle. And a vegan lifestyle elicited far more deaths through the production of crops and so on and so forth than living an animal-based lifestyle. And again, I don't want to get too controversial with this, but the stats are there, and they were in this podcast that I released. And this was achieving incredible views at a rate of knots, and then it just stopped dead. And then it never grew any further after that. And the content that I put out after has very little views. And, call it what you want, but I believe that there's things at work behind the scenes which are trying to prevent you and I from spreading the good word, So where are we going to be? I don't know. The carnivore community is growing at a rate of knots also. I think people are becoming more aware of what real food is. If you search for carnivore searches on Google, you can see that this is increasing while the vegan sort of searches are coming down. And look, I'm not against vegans or vegetarians. I work with vegans. I work with vegetarians. I work with low carb, ketogenic, and carnivore people. I'll work with anyone who wants to improve their health and well-being, who wants to improve the health of the planet, who wants to improve, the anything towards animal cruelty, for example. I'll work with anyone, and if you want to live a vegan lifestyle, that's fine. All I can do is pass on that information, and I will work with you to allow you to achieve the best nutrition you can from that lifestyle. So I'm not picking on anyone, and I'm not naming and shaming. It's you live whatever lifestyle you want. All I'm trying to do is I want to pass on this information so you can make an educated decision and move forward. You can use that information to make that educated decision. But it's a tough one. I don't know which way it's going to go. I think the carnivore community is growing, and I think the likes of you and I just need to continue to push this, educate people, and hopefully there'll be enough of us that will see the light and will counter the narrative. But I don't know is the truth. It's a scary world we live in.
Indeed. So if you are working with someone and maybe they're on a typical diet for an athlete with their carb loading, that kind of thing, and they show interest and they want to kind of switch over to carnivore, how would you advise they do it?
For an athlete, through incremental changes, they are going to see a significant drop off in athletic performance. Usually, especially if they do this quickly. If they've been low carb, then the adaptation process can be quicker. But ideally, through incremental changes, as we teach the body to transition over to using ketones. When we look at adaptation, the term fat adapted gets thrown around. Fat adaptation actually occurs incredibly quickly. It's keto adaptation that takes a little bit longer. Now, keto and carnivore are looked as two separate things, but they do cross over. If you live a carnivore lifestyle, then you are predominantly ketogenic. Yes, you may come out of this, based on ketone levels, but then my opinion on this is that, you are still ketogenic with less than 0.5 millimoles, within the system. And again, that's open for debate. But when you're consuming natural fats and animal proteins, you're typically ketogenic for most of the time. So to become keto adapted takes longer. It's on average, it's between 3 to 6 months. It took me closer to 12. You can upregulate these pathways. So we do this by increasing the monocarboxylate transporters, also known as the MCTs, but not to be confused with MCT oil, medium chain triglycerides. The monocarboxylate transporters we can increase by high intensity workouts. So sprinting or rowing and fast stuff on the cycling will increase the monocarboxylate transporters. The monocarboxylate transporters are also used by hormones, which means you increase the efficacy and production of hormones and the transport of the hormones. And what the MCTs do is they transport beta hydroxybutyrate from the liver where it's made via HMG-CoA, and it's sent to the target cell, and it goes through a series of steps through a couple of different enzymes, SCOT, ACAT, and BDH, and it then is used within the target cell. So we can increase the efficacy of the MCTs by high intensity training. We can also increase the efficacy of the MCTs by consuming MCT oil, so medium triglyceride oil, which is a compound that is found in natural proteins, but we can increase it by using that because of its ability to be sent straight to the liver through the hepatic portal vein, and it creates ketones. And these things teach the body, this is quite controversial as well. Exogenous ketones, and look, for full disclosure, I manufacture C8 oil. I manufacture ketones. This is part of what I do in order to help and guide people from low carb ketogenic lifestyles towards carnivore. I use MCT oil, I use exogenous ketones for different reasons, but ketones flood the brain with, they breach the blood-brain barrier, they increase the mechanical efficiency of the heart, they help block NLRP3 inflammasome. They do incredible things in the body, and as an athlete, they allow me to perform better. And I've proven this based on heart rate. Before a public speaking event, I'll drink some ketones that I produce. And again, these are natural. They're produced from bacteria, two types of bacteria. So these are natural. Do you need to take them? No. Live in a carnivore lifestyle, you don't need to take any supplement. But I would also look at things like MCTs, electrolytes, and exogenous ketones as not being supplements because they come from nature. All we're doing is cherry picking certain parts in higher quantities, and we can get into that at another time if you wanted to, Dave. But I believe that there's a place for these should you wish to do so. But the fact is that if you live a clean lifestyle, we don't need any supplementation, but we do if we are vegan, for example. At some point, we need to start supplementing with iron. At some point, we need to start supplementing with cobalamin or B12. And we don't have to supplement with anything when we live a carnivore lifestyle. Sometimes there's a call early on for electrolytes because of the imbalance with sodium, potassium. And again, I won't bore you with the science there. But it's through these incremental changes. So for an athlete, the supplementation of MCTs and exogenous ketones can upregulate these pathways and allow them to perform better. Exogenous ketones we see being used in professional sports. The Tour de France winning teams have been snapped by the paparazzi, using exogenous ketones during their stints in the Tour de France, and they use it for a reason. These things do work, so they can upregulate. The other thing that it does, it will increase. It'll increase one of the compounds that Lance Armstrong was banned for, erythropoietin, EPO. So EPO is something that's made naturally in the body from the kidneys, and it allows us to create more red blood cells. And taking things like exogenous ketones after a tough workout allow us to do this naturally. So so there are a place for these things should people wish to take them. If anybody wants more information on that, then feel free to reach out. But the fact is, you don't need any of these things. I haven't come on to sell product, and I'll quite often talk people out of taking a supplement, because more often than not, we don't need them. We just need to eat as nature intended. We just need to consume, these natural fats and animal proteins. And once these athletes start to do that through these incremental changes, so reducing carb over time, building up the natural fats, teaching the body to produce more ketones naturally, then they start to see the benefits. But it is through these incremental changes.
So Richard, how can people reach out to you? How can they find your YouTube and your website and any other channels you've got?
Perfect, thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. My channel is the Keto Pro. It's Keto-Pro on YouTube. Look, I began my journey low carb, became ketogenic. I am carnivore. But again, there's a crossover between keto and carnivore. So this, and I'm known as the Keto Pro. And again, I'm there to teach anyone. So on YouTube, I go live. I go live at least once a week, and I go live with Stephen Thomas, who I know you're good friends with. Stephen and I go live every Sunday on YouTube at 7 p.m. UK time. This is an hour of live Q&A, so you can jump on and you can ask questions for free. Stephen and I also share a community, a private community. It's incredibly cheap. It works out at $4 a month, which is like £3. And what we do in there is we go live twice a week. So we go live on Sunday for 30 minutes after the YouTube live, and again on Monday at 7 p.m. UK time for an hour. And then we do other things. We get special guests in, and I think it'd be fantastic to have you as a guest on there if you were up for that on one day. And it's a means for people such as yourself to part words of wisdom and to talk about your story. But the beauty of these private groups is that they're small. They're incredibly small and intimate, and it's a means to come on to, as you and I are now. It's on a Zoom platform, so you can be on the screen, you can be visible, or you can turn your screen off. You can mute, you can type in questions. You don't have to be seen, but you can ask a question, and then we can answer the question. And if you've tried the answer, or you want more information, you can come back straight away, and there's a means that we can open up a dialogue, basically to get to the root cause and put an action in place. And that's an incredibly cheap way to get, what I'd class as free advice. And there's lots of other stuff available within the group as well. And the price is going up on this shortly. So that group is fantastic. My website, if you guys want to check that out, is theketopro.com. Don't shoot me when you go there. There are products on there that many of your followers wouldn't consume because they do contain compounds. I'm trying to cater. I want to help everyone who wants to make healthy decisions. So there are low carb options on there. There are ketogenic options, and there are carnivore options. So there's something for everybody. I am working on coding the site, so it'll be more streamlined in regards to which diet and lifestyle that you want to live. But I always come back, Dave, to how I became carnivore. I didn't wake up being carnivore. I started with being low carb, then I became dirty keto, then clean keto, then strict keto, then I've gravitated into becoming more animal based, and now I'm what I regard myself as being strict carnivore. But it's taken me a long period of time through incremental changes to get there. So if that means that I need to help somebody by reducing carb in the first place, then that is the first rung of the ladder. That's the first step. So don't shoot me when you go there, because there are product on there that many of your followers won't agree with. But I'm trying to help the world. I'm trying to change the world. So I'm trying to offer something for everybody. I'm available on Instagram, Richard Smith Nutrition. And also the main one, so that's my private one, or my nutrition part. And the other one is Keto Pro. If you search for those, you should find them on there. But my YouTube channel, Dave, is incredibly small comparative to your own. It's an intimate group, so it's fantastic to come on. There's a lot of selection of incredible videos on there. I've been fortunate enough to be on with Sean Baker and Bart Kay and Anthony Chafee and Zoe Harcoom and so on. And they've been on my channel. So there's incredible information on there. But unfortunately, because of some of the information I've given out, I feel that the channel doesn't grow and doesn't get the airtime that it deserves. So please feel free to come over and give me a follow on there to help me boost my numbers, because the more that are on there, the better we can spread this word. And hopefully, the chat that you and I have had today has parted some words of wisdom that will allow somebody to make some change, because that's why we do what we do. We're trying to educate. We're quite literally trying to change the world. And I'm hoping that is what today is done. So thank you for the opportunity. It's been massively and greatly appreciated.
Yeah, no, thank you for taking the time to come on, Richard. I'll put all the links below in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing your experience. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Anytime.